And now I'm just going to start like we were just doing the show. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky, or perhaps you are streaming on artxfm.com. This is LVA's Artebella on the radio, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art. I'm your host, Keith Waits, and I have two guests today that have been a part of the Native Reflections exhibit, which was developed by the Kentucky Arts Council and has toured the state for, I think, about 2 years now. It has come to its final exhibit time here in Louisville at Metro Hall. Louisville Visual Art participated in bringing that show here for its last little run, and it will be at Metro Hall. It is up right now as we talk, and it will be up at Metro Hall through the end of March. Metro Hall down on West Jefferson Street in Louisville, Kentucky. I have two of the artists, and there are many artists, but I just have two of those artists here with me today. Fred Nez-Keams, who lives in Anderson County and is Navajo, and Brigit Truex, who is living in Fayette County and is of the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi. Am I saying that correctly?
That's right.
Did I get it right? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I probably should have checked first, but I just lucked out this time, and we got it okay. So, Native Reflections is an exhibit of art by, and I think the terminology they're using is Native Americans, but it seems like there's a lot of different terminology now. People talk about First Peoples or Native Peoples or Native. But that is the idea that these are Native American artists living and working in Kentucky, and they're all around. They make a point in when they list all the artists of talking about which county they're all from. But I want to just first talk about what kind of work it is. And Brigit, let's just talk to you. Just tell me, you've got two paintings in the exhibit. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're doing radio, and this will be a video element, but we're not standing in front of them in an exhibit somewhere. And if you do want to go to the Kentucky Arts Council website, there is a video that shows all the work. That's a really good sort of a summary of the exhibit. But Brigit, how would you describe the two pieces that are in the show and how that represents your practice as a visual artist?
Well, when I first heard about it, I hadn't really anticipated painting these two subjects. They're very different. One is more of a representational picture of a scene, and the other is 4 women dancers at a powwow dancers. And that was the first one I did because I've danced for years, and unfortunately, I've gotten to the point in my life I'm not able to dance much because I have a bad knee, which could have been contributed for 20-some years of dancing, more than 20. But it reflected very much my love of the whole feeling of a powwow. And I first started dancing when I lived in Massachusetts. When I mentioned that I lived there, that was quite a while ago, but I danced, I was there about 12, 14 years, and then in California for 12 years. So I was able to tap into both places for that community. And the way that I portrayed the women, there's very sort of subtle details in the painting. They're 4 traditional women, as you would see at a powwow. So you see them from the back. You don't see their faces. You see them from the back. And they also represent the 4 directions of, in that case, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest. And in the painting, again, it's very subtle. If you see the picture, you'll notice their clothing actually is it's what's called cloth. It's not the buckskin. When you're dancing, they'll say cloth and buckskin, or just, and then the northern and southern traditional. There's a lot of very accurate, specific details about the way they're dressed represents where they're from. but it also represents the four directions. And part of that representation in the painting, there's each woman on her regalia, and I always am very careful to point out to people who don't go to powwows or who do and are not as familiar with the terminology. We refer to our clothing as regalia, not costumes, because some people will say that, and it's really insulting. It's not a costume. This is not like, we're not playing. This is not dress ups.
Right, because a costume does tend to suggest play or pretend or theatrical, where you're being something other than yourself. But regalia, I would think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but my thought about that word is that regalia are things that you wear to celebrate your true self, right? You're celebrating the real culture. Yeah,
exactly, and that's well put. That I wish everybody could hear that. But at any rate, as I say, there's a very small nod to the four directions, because on the bottom of their skirts, and the one with the woman with a button blanket, is a very fine line of color which ties in those four colors, which is red for the east, yellow for the south, black for the west, and white for the north. So it's all those, it's just little details that I wanted to pay homage to, all the traditions that are in there. But and on a sort of a less well-known fact is that the women actually all represent people that I know that I've danced with. So it's a little honor. I told two of the girls that live in California, I said, "You're famous. You're in these paintings." So,
well, that's nice.
Any rate,
so many that it works on so many layers, so many levels, and has so many layers to it.
Yes, exactly. So that it's a very laden picture, but I enjoy. Again, it's a celebration of the women dancers, and honoring them and just celebrating. And the other painting is actually, the title refers to sort of a dichotomy, which we were talking about, how you can be in different places and try to feel at home. The Abenaki people are called the people of the dawn. And Vermont and Quebec is where my family's from, and that's called the Dawnland. And so the title of that picture, the one that's more of a scene, is called Dawnland, but it's a representation of dawn over the Kentucky River. Because I was fascinated when I moved here, the structure and the colors and the texture of the limestone, the Palisades. I'm not familiar with rivers with Palisades. Usually they're either mountains that come down to a river, or it goes right to the ocean. So I was just fascinated by how layered the rocks are in the limestone, and I wanted to sort of pay homage to my ancestral home, plus living in Kentucky. So that's the Kentucky River, and it's like an autumn with the sunrise coming up, and that's more just a scenic, a little less symbolic than the other painting. But I was very, very, very pleased to be accepted into the exhibition, and I'm just thrilled that it's been able to go throughout the state. And I don't know if you. I think you're aware of this. So right now, currently, it's at the Capitol Rotunda on display there.
No, it just left the Capitol.
Oh, did it leave? Okay, I wasn't sure. It was a couple of weeks ago we were there. So
yeah, he just Mark Brown from Kentucky Arts Council, who was kind of shepherding this all through.
Right.
He just brought it to Louisville.
Oh, okay.
We installed it at the Metro Hall.
Good. Well, that was quite a thrill to have it there, and it sort of symbolized, I felt, for me, that it was available and being seen by the whole state, which was really quite nice. And the tour has extended because of COVID. It was supposed to be only a year, less than a year, and now it's a year and a half, almost 2 years. It'll be March. Right. So, anyway, that was one good thing out of COVID.
Yeah, well, that's the silver lining. It had to be extended, but is a good thing. But because it was hard for people to get to it, that was the reason it had to be extended. So hopefully we'll keep getting an audience. Fred, I want to bring you in here for a little bit. So, Fred, you are I'm sorry, I just get this. You are you're Navajo,
Yes,
right?
I am. Yes, I am Dinesh from Arizona,
Yeah.
and I've been here. I relocated to Kentucky 15 or 16 years, and I brought my culture and my traditions with me. It's always been grew up with that. And first, I would just like to say thank you for bringing me on and having me on your podcast, Zoom. And I'd like to thank Mark Brown for actually reaching out to me and uh, asking me to be part of this arts, um, this arts uh, committee, and actually invited me down to Paducah at the Carson Center. That was a very nice. Uh, uh, I've been on a lot of stages, and to be on them stages with a lot of, well-known performers that actually stand on that stage and play for them. And I'd like to thank Native Reflections too for putting my flutes on display. And but it's always been with me ever since I was a little boy. And when I was out on the reservation, it really didn't come out until I actually moved here, and the flute actually started speaking to me even more. And seeing a lot of people go through depression and loss of relatives, and so and needed more healing, and being around the veterans, it just brought me more to my flute and to help others. And so I started making it and start playing and performing. So that's the real reason why I make the flute. And being on coming off the reservation, I couldn't find a flute too. Um, so by the time I moved here to Kentucky, it really came out, and I wanted uh, to start playing even more. So I couldn't find any. So that's when I started digging deep down inside and making my flute. And actually it took me a year to actually make one that can actually sound right and play right. And it took a lot of trials and error. And I just kept at it. And I went through a lot of different kind of wood, softwood, hardwood, exotic wood. And matter of fact, I ended up going back to the original cedar wood, where it, like back home, the flutes were made out of cedar. And I went through all these different wood and to come back to what it was supposed to be. And so then I started reaching out to a lot of different flute makers and getting their input. And I came across this gentleman out in Washington named Roger McGee, and he's a flute maker too. And so we got talking, and he started giving me a lot of pointers, and he ended up becoming a mentor. And without him, I would call him, every other day just to get, I'm going through this problem. So he would give me a little hints, and then so I just kept at it, and I learned everything I did. So maybe I'll do this, this way, and maybe it'll change the sound. So so by the time I got to 2 years, I finally got where I needed the flute to be. And then after that, he told me that, you needed to be different than other flute makers, so that when somebody picks up your flute, they know it's Fred Nez-Keams flute. So sitting in my living room, and then my wife, she told me, says, "Why don't you just put your culture into it?" So that's where I put all my turquoise and my bear claws and everything into the flute and that's how I came up with Yellowknife flutes.
Well, it's interesting, Fred. You anticipated a couple different questions I was going to ask you in talking, because I wondered when you said you started making them here, if there was anybody that had given you any kind of instruction, or so did you ever, when you were younger, before you came to Kentucky, did you ever know a flute maker or see them made?
Well, when I was in middle school, I had a friend that did make it, and you know, bless his heart, he passed on. And back then we were friends, and then as we gotten older, you know, a lot of gangs and alcohol and drugs came into this guy even worse. So at that time, I couldn't really talk to him, but the flute actually brought us together, even though all that was going on. And uh, so I actually got a flute from him when I was in in high school, and ever since then, it stuck with me deep down inside. And that flute, actually, I gave it to my cousin, and before I started making it, my mother passed away, and I end up, you know, crawling into a bottle for a couple of years, and then I end up moving away from the reservation to Flagstaff to my relatives, and I was sitting there on the porch one evening, and all of a sudden, I just heard this beautiful sound, and it was my cousin brother sitting there playing the flute, and that's like, so that actually got me out of being depressed and all that. So, like I said, it's always been in my heart, and now I make it, and I try to share my gift with everybody. I sell them all over the world. I sell them very less where people can afford, and that they can own one, not to hang on the wall. Or I know a lot of the flute makers are out there selling them pretty high, but like I said, I want everybody to have them and play it, and it changes everybody's lives. Um, so
Wow, it's a lovely story. Um, would you, well, before we continue, I know you're prepared to maybe play a little bit for us. Why don't we give that a try now? But tell us a little bit about the flute you're going to play. Is there anything special about that flute, or that you could share?
yes, this flute here, it's about 27 inches long,
Mhm.
and it's actually it's made out of cedar, and it's a key of F. And when I started making flutes, with all the trials and error, and I started throwing the flutes back in the fire, and then my mentor told me, all the flutes that you make, put it aside and put it in a bucket. Later on, you come back and you pull that flute out, you know what to do. So this flute here almost went back into the fire, but I actually sat in the bucket for almost 2 years. And so one day, this little flute guy was waving out of the bucket. So I just felt the spirit, and I picked it up, and I started looking at it. I started fixing this is where the voice is. So I started fixing the voice, and I made a different block. I made so many different blocks. So um, this flute here, everywhere I go, I always grab this flute, even though I got like maybe about 20 flutes. This is the one I always grab. It just sings so beautiful, and it's so loud. Um, so I'll play a little song for you.
Okay. Very nice.
And so I actually put my culture into this flute here. So you see it is wooded out. So our hogans our homes that we live on the reservation is called hogans. Hawan is how you say it in Navajo. So the logs are actually chinked out. So that's how I made the flute. So it looks chinked out and wooded out. So this little block here, if I turn it sideways, it represents the female and the male hair, the bun. So when you turn 50, you start to grow your hair. So I'll be turning 50 next year, so I'll be start growing my hair. But anyway, that represents CJ. That's how you say the Navajo bun, and it's tied in leather. So I incorporated that. And then you see the turquoise, since we as Navajos, the Nesh Schlicht, that's me, I am Navajo, we are turquoise, we are jewelry makers. And I got the bear claw here, and the bear is one of the animals that we do not bother. It's called shush. That's how you say bear in Navajo. It's one of the animals that we don't bother. We let it be in peace and harmony, because a bear is beautiful and it's unpredictable what it does. So I incorporated that in my flute. So that's how I came up with Yellowknife flutes. And then she was talking about the 4 directions, and these are actually I never knew what these were when I first started making flutes. I thought they were just designs and stuff, but actually these are actually tuning holes. And then again, they're actually called the 4 directions too. So I just thought say the 4 directions too. So.
Well, that's interesting, because I was thinking as you've been talking, and Brigit was talking earlier, you're not from Kentucky, and so the culture that we're talking about when we're talking about indigenous peoples are, for both of you guys, are whole different areas of the country. Like, you were very far apart from each other, and these are not traditions from Kentucky. I think a lot of the other artists maybe are from Kentucky when I look at their like Cherokee, and because I think the indigenous people's lands of Kentucky is primarily Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Osage. And I know you could break that down into other sort of specific tribes or groups. But I guess what I was wondering, as I was after listening to both of you talk, is like, are there similarities? Are there sort of fundamental things that show up in each native tradition, even when it's clear on the other side of the country? And that sort of is a suggestion that there is. Brigit, am I right? Is that true? Or do you think there's a greater separation?
Well, I'm trying to think about, other than the idea of the 4 directions, I think are certainly recognized, but interestingly enough, there are differences in the colors that are associated with them between certain tribes, certain nations. But I think it's to me, it's sort of a moot thing that they have a slightly different. Some people refer to 7 different directions, above and below, and then right here. But I'm often struck with, and this gets into the more personal, spiritual side of it, that I think there are certain elements that are essentially common across what we call Turtle Island, the whole North America. Mm-hmm. But the way I've always been taught is that each person's spiritual life is pretty much their own individual relationship with the Creator. It's not we don't have dogma as such, as to say, well, this is what we believe, and the idea of saying, well, you have to think like I do, is just completely, it's just so foreign. We don't even concede such a thought. Each person, I think the way I've been taught is you respect each other's own individual beliefs. So I think there are certain, maybe on a more an immediate sense, which I always thought was rather interesting with the certainly the advent of communications has sort of made, and I'm thinking specifically of powwows, that's, I think, has come about in the last say, oh, what, about less than 100 years. And it's become more homogeneous because people are traveling, people are seeing pictures, people are saying, oh, I like what so-and-so is wearing, and maybe you sort of modify and adjust and then adapt it to your own. But I think that each tribe, each nation certainly has its own traditions, individual traditions for beliefs and ways of behaving, certain events, certain things that happen. We have our own traditions, our own ceremonies, and that's usually very much individual, and very frequently, I'm sure, that we'll recognize this, that it's private. It's kept. Often they're not even discussed with non-natives, because that's just the way it is. There's certain things you don't do, certain things you do. But I'm not sure. I have to. I'm trying to think. Are there too many things that are common? Universal. I'm not sure that I would say they're universal. Although one thing that intrigues me, and I've written a little bit about this in a couple poems, that fascinates me. In fact, I have an old T-shirt with this. It's called the Underwater Panther. But that's just one person or character, whatever word you want to use. But it fascinates me that how common, if you can put quotes around common, that appearance of this animal is, from the northeast far up into, say, Canada, down the south, down the whole east coast, and then up the Mississippi River. And I find that fascinating, that there's at least one entity that so many tribes and nations have the same creature. That just intrigues me. I think, why is that? What happened that everybody's experienced the same animal? So,
well, Fred, I want to sort of ask you if you have any thoughts on that question about the relationship maybe between the different cultures. I mean, does what Brigit is saying, does that resonate with you? What are your thoughts?
Well, Fred Nez-Keams, yes, lay taught on the Shahawan. She non is as you don't catch you, don't top on how much is in Hanahashi. Most Native American or most tribes connect with clans, and like when I go home, I introduce myself to my elders, and and like we go into ceremonies, I would say my clan, and automatically they would know where I'm from. And a lot of these tribes in here in South America, which are our cousins, like the Incas and the Mayas, and some of the Alaskans, the Inuits up there, speak Navajo. And I've been watching a lot of TikTok videos, and a lot of them are from Alaska. And in a way, I know what they're saying. And I don't know, it's just something in the blood. I know what they're saying. And we all were similar, but we're not all the same. I mean, I can't really say it. We all have different languages. We all have different cultures, but in a way, they're all similar. The songs, the prayers, the healing, the ceremonies, and we all have drums, rattles, and flute. They're like the three oldest instruments. And it comes down to the language too. The language is very important. When I was in the boarding school, they did not let us talk our language. But when I got out, the boarding schools, I could hear my mom, my dad, and my uncles and aunts speak Navajo, but I already knew what they were saying. But and I was in boarding school, nobody spoke the language, and so now they're bringing the languages back into the schools. And same way with the Cherokees. I actually lived down in Cherokee for a year, and they almost lost their language too. And now they're starting to have classes, and um, about a young gentleman by the name of Matthew Tunai. He's actually down, he's full-blooded Cherokee, and he's actually teaching the language down there and teaching the youth. And the food, the traditional food is fry bread for everybody. And depending where you're at, like Alaskans, they eat a lot of whale and seals, and like us Navajos, we eat a lot of sheep and goats and elk. And the Midwest is the plains is more of the buffalo, and then you got the Seminole, which are the salmon and fish, and you got people up in New York. So it's amazing. We all are the same, but not the same. That makes sense.
You know, I can't help but think that, and again, I don't know that much about it, but it seems like that you're talking about cultures and traditions that came about at a time when the indigenous peoples were living, you know, this is way, 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 way back before any technology and before the industrial age, living, I guess what we might call a primitive lifestyle, but it was a lifestyle that was very connected to nature. That there seems to always have, in most, just any, even a surface sort of look at these different cultures, that the land, the elements, you know, and the sense of community were always important. I wonder if that isn't because Native American traditions are born of a time when that relationship to the earth and to nature was all you really had. Whereas you think about a lot of sort of you think about a lot of European and Western sort of religions came about in more at a time when society had developed into cities and then not technologies yet, but it seems more artificial, where it seems like the Native American cultures are tied to the earth. It's a very fundamental sort of relationship. And is that why maybe you see some similarities, that it's about earth and animals and things like that?
Yes, yeah, that's
Yeah.
so we all have our different cultures, but when it comes down to gathering as all as one, and that's where the powwow comes in, and then it breaks it down to different categories of dancing. You got traditional, you got buckskin, you have fancy dancing, grass dance, and I'm actually a crown dancer. I'm actually a Apache crown dance, but I'm Navajo. But how that dance came to me was there was a dorm attendant that was actually Apache, and he thought that he showed these little Navajo boys how to dance Apache, and that's where I became a crown dancer. But a long time ago, at one time, the Apaches and the Navajos were together fighting, and then Navajos, we wanted to go off. We as Navajos are planters. We live in harmony. We herd sheep, and we wanted to live, you know, the quiet life, and that's where we split from the Apaches. And so, if Apache is talking, I can understand what Apache is saying. And most of their language is kind of like split in half. like if I say yat a, that means hello. In Apache, they say yahe. It's kind of like everything's kind of like split in half. So, but
Sort of,
that's, yeah.
Sort of reminds me that, you know, there's different kinds of Spanish too. There's no just one Spanish.
Yeah.
But all the different versions seem to have some shared elements, but then they sort of develop their own sort of branches or something along the way. But that's interesting. And Brigit, I mean, have you encountered a lot of times when different indigenous cultures have interacted or overlapped, or have you had that kind of experience where you've learned things from outside of your own tradition?
Well, I actually didn't even come to embrace my heritage because I didn't know anything about it until I was in my 40s.
Oh, wow.
I know. And I was thinking about that recently, that I actually read a book. Well, to back up a little bit, my grandmother used to live with us, and she was born in a little island in Vermont in the middle of the upper end of Lake Champlain. And she always referred to herself as French Canadian, which I thought was rather interesting. I mean, she always said that very clearly. It wasn't French, it wasn't Canadian, it was French Canadian. And not too many years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, I met another Abenaki poet who I mentioned that to her, and she said, but that's a code word for Indian, for Native American, or what we would say First Nations, because before her, the generations before her were all from Canada. So I have a real affinity for Canada. And I happened to read a book of just a few years ago here, talking about, it was a novel, but it mentioned this Abenaki man, and there was a reference, and I've truly forgotten the man's name, which was fine, but he was one of the early instigators of eugenics, and he lived in Vermont. And when I read that, I had to do some more research, and I got a book. I had to ask the library to get me a special request for this research book. And when I read more about this, I realized, I thought, oh, that explains a lot to me why I never heard anything about our heritage. Because as I say, my grandmother was born in 1865, right at the end of the Civil War. And I think that, again, understanding the impact, living on the East Coast, particularly where you had more interaction with Europeans, and I've always said that the Eastern tribes, geography has so much to do with our history, because that was where the first colonists, the first European colonists came from and interacted with the native people on the East Coast, very specifically in the Northeast, the Northeast woodlands. And so I think that that's why it was never discussed, never talked about. And as I say, reading this book and understand, and actually in the book, this man who was an early founder of the eugenics movement had actually worked for legislation specifically against the Abenaki people, which I found quite chilling, because it was he named them. He called us gypsies because we would traditionally move from place to place during the year when, like you're saying, before there was technology, literally living off the land, you would move from place to place so that you didn't overuse the soil or the hunting. You would move, again, that seasonally you would move around. And so this man's idea, we were gypsies because we didn't have a permanent home with a structure that was built like a little box. So I've always thought that when I read that, I thought that explains a lot about the hesitancy to talk about it. That if you were, quote, assimilated, like Fred was talking about, with the boarding school, that was the same point. If you assimilated, then you were okay. So as I say, unfortunately, I didn't know much about my heritage, and it was after my parents both died. I didn't have anybody to ask about these things. So it was just basically people that I met when I lived in New England, and going to powwows and communicating and doing more research on it. I found more about what the heritage was. But I think, just as you were saying, it's so true that, and I think even today, even living in cities, the people that follow the more traditional ways are certainly still tied into the natural world. There's no distinction, there's no separation. That's so much a part of your everyday life and your awareness and your ceremonies and your prayers and your behavior it's just intimately tied in with the natural world. So there's no distinction.
Well, and it's interesting what you say about the phrase French Canadian, and I mean, because I just found out recently there was, what you're talking about is where perhaps the native peoples thinking that they needed to hide themselves, hide that identity at some point, right, in history, because I was so shocked to find that there was a point in time in which it was outlawed by the federal government for any Native Americans to perform any part of their rituals.
Religious ceremonies, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was illegal to do
Yeah.
that, which just strikes me as absurd. And I don't know how that, but and it was, I don't think the law was in place a long time. I think the stupidity of it.
Oh, it was just eliminated, I think, in the 50s,
Yeah, well,
1950s.
Well, I'd heard that it was the Roosevelt administration, but
No.
but still, it was but I don't know. It seems like it came into place in the 20th century when everybody kind of thought, it's like, if you want to be a meaningful part of society, you basically have to be just like the white people. You just
Yes,
have to
exactly.
you just have to duplicate that.
Right.
Yourself.
So
And
that's what Fred was saying. That's exactly the whole point, and still is, unfortunately. The point of these boarding schools was to absolutely deny, wipe out any native heritage and make you, quote, assimilated.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a topic that just makes me crazy. I could go on and on about that because
Right.
it's so, it basically is almost genocide. I mean, I've talked about that, that it's a deliberate policy to wipe you out one way or the other. And if you're not going to die, then you have to look and think and act like all the, quote, what I call the dominant culture, or
Right.
predominant, not dominant, but predominant.
Yeah, if you think about it, it was only 40 years ago that was still the boarding schools was happening. There still is boarding schools back on the reservation, but now they have rules and regulations that they go by. But back in the day, it was they wanted us to be,
European.
none of our heritages or nothing.
Yeah.
They didn't want us to learn anything. Like my mom passed on, but she passed away at the age of 57, I think. But she talked about, she went to boarding school too in Oklahoma. She went to Chilocco, Oklahoma. But I remember her telling me these stories of how it was, but my mom passed away so young, but I remember her talking about that. So it's not very long. And if you think about, like, if you go back 100 years, maybe 160, a lot has changed. But I'm just glad that we have a lot of programs now that help, like what you were saying, your heritage. You're finally learning your heritage. We have a lot of urban natives that don't know their language and where they come from, but yet, like I was saying, it's deep down in their heart. They already know where they come from, and they understand the language, and it comes natural. And I'm just glad that there's programs like Native Reflections and many others, and others that are teaching the language and learning about where they come from and who they are. And me, as coming from a very traditional background, which my grandma and my grandfather are medicine people, and my uncle was a medicine man, a shaman, I guess you would say. And I've seen and watched him do the traditional songs and prayers and how it's being done. But in a way, I don't have the right to do it, but I know it, but I do practice it myself.
Right.
I do it myself, but I don't have. I don't want to do it the wrong way, I guess.
Right.
So I leave that to the traditional and our elders, and most of our elders are leaving this world and passing on, and they're taking everything with them. So right now, so we try to, all I have is one aunt left in my mom's generation, and that's it. and then it comes down to us, our
Yeah.
generation. And most of all my relatives, my brothers, my cousins, were all full bloods. But when it comes to our kids, a lot of them are half black, half Mexicans, half white. And that's where we actually have to step in and teach them both,
Right.
both worlds of their tradition and the other.
Right.
And
Right.
we need to do a lot better on that. So
Well, and I was very heartened to hear as vaccines started to first become available, somebody I know who speaks, I believe it's Cherokee, was notified that because she spoke a native language and that the number of people who'd spoke it was diminishing, that she was given a high priority in get some of the first people, like, you know, those people were identified and told, you need to get these vaccines because it's important that we protect you because you have this responsibility because you have the language. And I was like, well, finally, you know, our government's sort of getting it right.
Finally.
But so we're running out of time here, and so I want to say thank you to both of you, Brigit Truex, who is a writer, a poet, and a painter, 2 paintings in the Native Reflections exhibit, and Fred. I was just going to make sure I said this right. Fred Nez-Keams.
yes, Keams.
I didn't have it in front of me. Who makes flutes, plays flutes. So you guys are all like, you're like multi hyphenates. You know,
Yeah.
you're artist, you're an artist, musician, composer, you're an artist, poet, writer. So thank you so much. we're gonna end with Fred playing again, but I just wanted to mention, so both of these artists are included in Native Reflections, which is an exhibit that has been around the state now for about 2 years. And I just want to very quickly mention some of the other artists. Let's see. Darlene Campbell, Jacqueline Carruthers, Cher Devereaux, Lawson Glasgreen, Eugene King, let's see, Jeanette Parent, Caldwell, Linda Pierce, Tiffany Payette, Carrie Rogers are the other artists that are in this exhibit. It is currently at Metro Hall in Louisville, Kentucky through the end of March of 2022. So thank you for being here. And Fred, if you would be so kind as to, we'll end with another bit of music from you, please.
Okay, this flute out here, it was gifted to me by an old a gentleman from Oklahoma. Was raised in Oklahoma and was taught by an elder, and now he lives in California. He's actually like 80 something now, and this is actually his flute, and it's a Comanche, and it's a very old style sound. So when I play it, you'll hear it. And this is a love song for my wife.
Very nice, Fred Nez-Keams and Brigit Truex. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for being a host. We appreciate it.